Yeah.
I mean, I'm biased because I love Tom Holland, but Peter Parker, that Spider-Man, talk about a guy with like inner strength.
Well, actually that brings me up to something, because we had a Peter who had matured with that J. Michael Straczynski run,
mm-hmm.
and he had become a stronger character, and he had matured a bit compared to how some people write them, just because J. Michael Straczynski is not as weak as some comic writers, I suspect. But then they did One More Day, and suddenly he's a bachelor, living with Aunt May again, and he's basically a boy. He's not taking on the responsibilities of a man. Mm-hmm. He's not. They took him back to a 20-something bachelor, essentially, because they didn't want him to have the responsibility, as far as I can tell. And I don't want to go too much into like traditional gender roles and, the man needs to be the head of the house, but it's like, that is what I like in a man, is a man who is a leader. So it's just seeing the way he's become this man child. There's the word. And we see it a lot in reality today. It's men who are dependent on their mothers, and men who they won't take responsibility, and they act like children, and they don't know how to clean a house or anything. I see that in Peter, and I think that comes from the writers who that's what they're like. And
agreed.
So they think that's just how you write a man, because they think they're a man. No, you're a man child.
And that's a touchy subject. Like I can already feel the hackles rising on
yeah, even as I said it, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be another Kurt Cobain comment.
You know what? Again, it's a fair thing. Like, I go back to Star-Lord, right? And I think that, like, comparing the first Guardians film with what James Gunn did on the Punisher, the Peacemaker. Why'd I say Punisher? Peacemaker. I think that if James Gunn went back and made Guardians of the Galaxy today, he would take a different approach to Peter Quill.
For me, Peter Quill makes sense for how he was raised, and the fact he is mentally stunted to that moment when his mother died. But I do think, like we see, he can't open the last gift she gave him, and that's something that comes. It's the end of the first Guardians movie when he finally sits down and he opens Awesome Mix Volume 2. That was the moment he should have started to mature.
Yeah. I just wish that they were more realistic about having mommy issues doesn't mean you mistreat women and use them like props.
Here's the thing. I actually take it back to him learning from the music she gave him, because there's that moment where he and Gamora are pulled aboard the Ravager ship after like he gave her the breathing apparatus. And he's like, I don't know, I've never felt like this for anyone. I decided I wanted to be selfless for the first time and save someone else instead of myself. And then I'm like, no, wait, this is the Fooled Around and Fell in Love song.
Yeah.
This is every 80s movie.
Okay, ever. Fair.
So I think more than just being the mommy issues, it's he learned from media, which is something else I see nowadays. And that's where his ideas come from. And we even see that a bit in the second Guardians movie, where he's like, we're supposed to be like Cheers. We're supposed to be like this. And Gamora is just like, no. And that's why the hug at the end of the second movie was so unsatisfying, was because they never actually resolved that.
Yeah.
And he didn't learn the way he was supposed to. Like, the whole thing with David Hasselhoff and Kit and everything, that was cute. And it did emphasize that, you know, he spent a lot of time watching TV and listening to music. But yeah, the fact that I was like, no wait, that scene is just Fooled Around and Fell in Love, which is one of the best songs from the soundtrack.
Okay,
I'm like,
fair. You defended that well.
yeah, yeah,
At least there's something to pull from there.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I don't. The minute Chris Pratt plays anybody, I'm not gonna like him.
No, and it's like I have to have a soft spot for him just because when he first came on screen and he put on the headphones and he's dancing to Come and Get Your Love, I'm like, oh shit, that's me. That I relate to that. And of course, then he started talking and the womanizing happened. But like, there's still that bit of fondness. So I'm like, okay, but I relate to that bit.
That's what because I'm like, okay, he's the everyman. He's the guy. He's all of us. Right. And I think that when you have a character be a womanizer, he is no longer all of us.
Can I say this? Okay, I have issues with the musical Hamilton, but one of my most frustrating ones is so we get his son Philip.
Yeah.
And they have one song to make us care about this character. Just one. And they make him a player. And I'm like, I don't care. I am waiting for that pistol to go off because I can't stand him. And oh god, so one of the things about there's a line where they say that Hamilton was such a player and he was always getting with the ladies and stuff, and so much so that Martha Washington named her pet Tomcat after him. And I'm like, that Tomcat didn't mean player.
No.
Back in that time, if anything, she named her Tomcat Alexander Hamilton because the cat was young, scrappy, and hungry.
Right.
Like Hamilton. And so I'm like, it really felt like bringing in this hip hop trend because
that's exactly what it was. Yeah.
It's like, oh, you get all the ladies, and especially from Lin-Manuel Miranda, it kind of feels
that was part of the characterization. Well, I mean, I'm gonna commit heresy again. The character as written and the way Lin-Manuel Miranda plays him are not the same character. Because
I'm sorry, Lin-Manuel Miranda is not charismatic enough to hold a show. That was something I saw in the reviews even before I watched the show.
Structurally, it's not him. The guy who holds the show together is
Aaron
Burr. Yeah, he's fantastic.
Yeah. And then I saw Miranda in Mary Poppins Returns, and it was really obvious there, especially since he's supposed to be the Bert character.
I was gonna say that's what impressed me so much about Paul Bettany and WandaVision, because he's stepping into that Dick Van Dyke shoes, and he pulls it off, and that is hard. Well. Yeah, that is hard. Coming after Dick Van Dyke in anything is so difficult. He was such a consummate triple threat entertainer of his age that you're going to be in his shadow no matter what. And that was my big, because I was going in the show's called WandaVision.
Yeah.
The show is Wanda with Vision.
And here's the thing, if it had been written for them to be balanced, Bettany could have pulled it off.
He did not get because I'm a sucker for those identity is in the mind stories.
Yeah.
So the whole Ship of Theseus thing that they did with him, and because one of the big things that I'm fascinated by is if an AI so simulates human emotion that they believe they are feeling, what is the difference? Right. And that's what I always loved about the Vision.
Yeah.
I thought it was like, to me, when I was a kid, marrying a robot guy, goals, right? And yes, it was silly, and yes, they never really explained it in the comics and all that stuff, but Vision was cool looking, and he was different, and I liked him.
you mentioned what if Wanda was attracted to him because he's not real, and so
Yeah.
there's a safety in that. I almost wonder if more than that is he's a robot, he can't die.
And then he did, and that's yeah. She was looking for artificial security that can
Yeah.
only really come from within. And I mean, what she did was horrifying. And
Yeah.
I was so glad. I mean, there's the difference between strength and power in a
Yeah.
character, right? Wanda has a lot of power. She doesn't have an inner strength. And it's also the difference between, I like what Marvel is doing now with how things like the super soldier serum only bring out what was already in someone.
Mm-hmm.
And so Steve, my favorite part of What If was that first episode where it showed Steve Rogers would have been a hero no matter what,
Yes.
because heroism is internal, right? We all love Captain Britain, and then Bucky has a much weaker sense of identity, which is why I think he was, they were able to break him. And again, I see why the rumors of the fan theories about him being bisexual, that would have been really shitty at that time, right?
Yeah.
And then we get US Agent, who is just terrifying as shit. I mean, he's a scary guy. And I'm interested with what they do with that roster of characters, because then we get the new Black Widow. I don't know how you feel about Yelena.
I
Massive
like
improvement.
Yelena,
What's that?
actually. I like Yelena,
Yeah.
actually.
To me, the thing I like about her is that she's not mopey.
Yeah.
It happened. Fucking deal. She's that is what Natasha was in the comics. And it sucks that we never got that with Natasha Romanoff on the MCU, but at least we get a Black Widow where it's like, yeah, they sterilized me and whatever. Now I can sleep with whoever I want and don't have to worry about it.
I do like that I like that we do get to see two different reactions
Yeah.
to that, because it, you get some women who want to be mothers and they're almost born with that. And then you get some they don't, and it doesn't matter to them. And at least we get to see some nuance in the reactions. I never hated Natasha being upset about it, just because I at least understood how it could work for the story, and as a personality point, and I've related to it a bit. So
I think that's exactly what it was designed to do, though. It was giving up a major point of the character from the comics to
mhm.
make her more relatable. And again, it's that thing of, oh, the problem with the strong female character is often they confuse strong and likable. You have to be
Yeah.
strong, but you also have to be likable. And let's face it, that's hard with a male character, because the minute he starts seeming a bit like a bully, you get into trouble. But the threshold is so much harder to meet when it's a female character, just because female strength tends to be, what's her name from The Handmaid's Tale, how much you can endure.
Ugh, ugh,
Yeah.
misery porn.
Yeah, it's
And,
misery porn.
but I do think one thing we've forgotten, and that a lot of people have lost sight of, is we've become so fixed on outward strength
Yeah.
and physical strength and how much can you take, that we've lost sight of the quieter strength and the ability to lead, like I
Yeah.
was saying, the whole idea of the alpha male, and being strong in who you are. And I think I think that's something society struggles with a lot, is finding who we are. And we try to, one thing the way I ended out the last discussion, talking about how we try to find our identities in these external places, where it's like, oh, I'm a nerd, I'm a Trekkie, I'm this, I'm that, I'm a wine mom, live, laugh, love,
Mm-hmm.
even. And we try to build our identities on these external things. Even Superman, as much as I love Superman and I admire him as a role model, he's not something you can build your personality on. But we get people who do, and they become so emotionally invested
Yeah.
in these characters and these ideas. And then, so as soon as that thing is changed, like even look at me with MJ, where I'm like, I don't want another version of MJ. I want the MJ that makes me feel seen, and that I look at and go, oh my God, I'm not alone. But so we get people who aren't aware that they can't be based on these things. So as soon as that thing is changed, or they feel attacked, they feel it's being attacked, they feel personally attacked. And it they're not strong in themselves, so they can't handle this external foundation, the shifting sand, essentially, that they've built their characters and personalities on. And it there is no internal strength. And I
Yeah.
think that also comes back to, we tend to think of it as more of a feminine strength. It's the woman holding the house and the town together when the man is off at war. And this is going to seem totally random. There is a line in My Big Fat Greek Wedding where, the mother says, the man is the head of the house, but the woman is the neck.
Right.
And, your neck is probably one of the strongest muscles in your body,
Yeah.
because it has to hold the weight of your skull and your brain. And I think there is, obviously in the movie it's used as the whole, she can manipulate the man any way she wants, she turns the head however she
Right.
wants. That's a little less healthy, but I always liked the idea of, you have the strong man and then you have the woman who can run the household, and but also support him as he
Well,
makes decisions,
that's what
which
I loved
again
about
is,
Peggy Carter.
yes. And for me, it's like, I don't need Peggy on the front lines, because she I, I don't hate her going on the front line, but it's like, I I'm tired of female warriors.
But that
Person.
that scene where he's going down in the plane in the
Yeah.
last movie, I mean, that whole movie was a series of Steve McQueen homages,
Yeah.
right? And so when he's going down in that plane and everybody knows what's about to happen,
Yeah.
and they create that moment trapped in amber. I mean, that she was doing bomber girl phone sex, right? She was just taking him away from the reality that he was probably going to die. He ends up
Yeah.
being trapped in ice, but they all like, this is it. And that was just such a moment of he's so vulnerable in that moment. And she's there for him and she's keeping it together. And it's more important that she keeps it together in that scene than him.
Yeah.
Right. I like what that was so powerful just because
Yes.
it was that old school war effort. Everyone had a part to play. She did more for the war effort, being there, holding his hand in that moment than
Yeah.
she could have being out on the front lines with a gun.
And I think a lot of people have forgotten the value of that in, you know, holding the front
Uh,
during the war.
like
And
to me, the other character that does that is Darcy in
yes,
Thor, and then you haven't seen Love and Thunder, but I love that she hates Thor.
I can
In
see that.
she hates him because he ghosted her bestie,
Yeah, I
you
can see
know,
that.
and I'm like,
So,
yeah, Darcy is BFF. Good for her.
and one thing, if Odin had been a better man, we could have seen it with Frigga. Because I think Frigga, what little we got to see of her, especially in Dark World, I that I would have loved to see more of her, because it seemed like she had that power behind the throne kind of thing. And
Yeah,
not that she was controlling things, but it's like I loved the role she held, even the way she was kind of flirtatious with her sons, not in an
it,
incestuous way.
it's
There was
it's
a deleted
interesting.
scene.
I'm sure Kenneth Branagh knew this, and I don't know if subsequent it happened by accident, but Thor seems to be more like his father, but he's not. He's
Yeah,
more like his mother. And
yeah,
Loki is closer to his mother, and they have a greater connection. But at the end, he picks up the power through lies that his father lived. Because Odin had so many fucking secrets.
yeah,
And that's what eventually led to the downfall of Asgard.
yeah.
And I don't care what anybody says, Asgard is not a people. Asgard is a
No.
place.
Oh god, that like I understand it's a prince without a people is nothing. But that doesn't mean
It's
that
still
a prince without land, oh god, it's so frustrating. It's
Asgard is
so meta.
metaphysically extremely important as a place. It is a
Yeah,
place. Like, no, it's a place. Okay, Thor's not smart, right?
no,
He's not the god of genius. He's the god of thunder. So
yeah,
okay, we allow him that. But I liked when She-Hulk took the piss out of that line too,
yeah.
because it's
Which,
such a stupid line.
yeah, it's okay.
But that, that's a point that you mentioned, and I wanted to loop back to, going back to my love for Sam, Falcon, then Captain America, is
Yeah,
that I was waiting all of Falcon and Winter Soldier for his first Cap speech,
yeah,
because I kept thinking, how does he do it? Because the whole theme was both him and Bucky are like, we're not Steve Rogers. And they're both, I don't want it, you want it. I don't want it, you want it. He gave it to you. No, you're the one who should have it, right? Neither of them wants the job.
yeah,
And Sam finally, they do the training montage with the shield, right?
yeah,
But his first Cap speech, that was going to be the pass fail for
yeah.
me. And the way they wrote that speech, you're talking about leadership and the ability
Yeah.
to inspire. And
It was very well done.
it was very aware that he couldn't get up there and pull Steve Rogers. He couldn't get up there and say Asgard is, this isn't Steve Rogers, this is Thor. I know, guys, Asgard is not a place. Asgard is a people. No, he actually has to persuade, and he actually does it through questions.
Yeah,
And talking about labels and mantles, and it's an absolute brilliantly written, because that's how he's doing it. He's still the counselor. He's still just challenging the narrative.
yeah. I was about to say that probably comes back to him being a grief counselor.
Yeah, but instead of it being the rah 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 affirmative statements, his speech is a series of appeals, of questions, right? How does
Yeah,
it feel to be helpless is a major line, but the question is, who was in the room with you when you're making those decisions? Is it the people you're going to impact, or is it just more people like you? His whole Cap speech is a series of questions, and that's not how Steve Rogers did it. And
no.
I just thought, from a structural point of view, I was just like, yes, Sam is my Cap. You convinced me. I didn't think it was possible. And
Yeah,
for, all the problems they had with having to retcon, because it was supposed to be a virus.
yeah.
And then COVID happened, and they couldn't. And so, yeah, it was rough in places, but that speech, it's like, yeah, somebody in that room, there is an example. Someone in that room had strength to tap into to write that speech, unlike a lot of the comic book writers. And this is going to sound like a really weird segue, but hear me out. I cannot stand when creators start fighting over their own work with people in on Twitter or something like that. And the one I'm most disappointed in is Neil Gaiman, because Neil Gaiman gave Tori Amos the piece of advice: people aren't there to hear you talk. They're not here for there to hug you. They're there to hear you play piano.
Yeah.
And Tori Amos talked about the fact that she stopped talking about what her songs were about because she had music journalists arguing her that they knew better than her what her songs were about. And she credits Neil Gaiman with teaching her that. And then he's on Twitter fighting fans over death fan art and fighting with Elon Musk about the Lord of the Rings. And, you know, I had a thing the other day where somebody on Twitch tried to tell me how one of my characters would speak. And I got really pissed.
See,
and I shut the fuck up.
See, this is why, as a writer, I hate the concept of death of the author. And it's like I get why it's there, but it's like, I wrote it, I know it. Stop telling me what my characters would do.
But this is the thing, right? Look at Gaiman fighting with fucking everybody. And I admit it made me rougher on Sandman, because it's like, okay, dude, if you're gonna school people about diversity, you better be letter fucking perfect in your execution. And oh, was it not?
Yeah.
Right? If he had said nothing, like, you know, Jen Gao did, the writer of She-Hulk, she put it into her writing. She's having a fight with the audience through the show, but she's letting her work speak for itself.
And she's not on Twitter arguing with the quartering.
Well, this is well, yeah, Witcher shout out. But, you know, this is the woman who wrote the Pickle Rick episode of Rick and Morty. She knows toxic fandom. And the number of guys who are just out there fighting. And I know I can't. I pick my battles, right? There are certain things I will fight because I am not directly affected, and it's wrong. Yeah. And you do have to spend some social capital for the things you believe in, but you can't fight with someone over something like that, because I knew that if I continued down that conversation, I was gonna get really, really upset. And it was going to be a legitimate moment of weakness. And you cannot, I mean, this is what hits me so hard about Natasha and the Scarlett Johansson character. I look at that and say, I'm not allowed those moments. I can't be pissing and moaning about the stuff in my life that didn't work out. You know, I am not allowed that. Because the minute I'm done, no one will ever listen to me again. It's all I have, because I have to do stuff. People aren't going to like me. So I can't lean on likability. You know, I can't hinge on those, you know, loner, I don't give a fuck stereotypes that so many male creators can. So I don't have that. All I have is I'm tough. And the minute I lose that, I have nothing. So I have to be very, very careful what weak moments to show, right? And it's always calculated. Like on Twitch last Tuesday, I actually said, guys, this conversation is depressing me. And that was a Steve Rogers deliberate moment of vulnerability. I channel Steve Rogers a lot. In those moments, because it's like, all right, I'm saying something true here. I'm saying something honest, and I could hide behind anger, but I'm actually going to be honest about what I'm feeling here. This conversation is depressing me. And of course, the people who were carrying it on, some of them cared, some of them didn't. And you see what people are really about when you're able to take that moment of vulnerability but be centered in it, right? And that's the difference between how Steve Rogers is vulnerable and how they made Natasha vulnerable. Steve Rogers, no one would do, I'm a monster, right? His perceived lack of a sex life, you know, is seen as we're all rooting for him because he had sex once in the 40s, right? It's not, it's one thing of, I really wanted to be a mother. I can't. This sucks.
Yeah.
Now, okay, the truth is that if we have ways of having kids. If you can't, a woman is not her gametes. That's something that really bothers me about the whole trans argument. There's ways if you want to be a parent. And because we have all these adoptive kind of cool uncles in the MC, it's always the uncle, the aunt, right? It's never the mom.
Yeah.
So if Natasha wanted to be a cool aunt, she could. And her best moments was when she was kind of being auntie to Captain America, right? She got really interested in his dating life. That was Nat. That all of a sudden she came alive. But come on, you're an Avenger, woman. You're a monster because your uterus doesn't work. That was the moment where I'm like, this is a guy putting words in a woman's mouth that he thinks she would say.
And I think the writing in that scene was just atrocious, and it did not understand even what it was trying to say.
It was trying to shoehorn a connection between Nat and Bruce that just, I'm sorry, wasn't there.
It doesn't make sense because the only thing we've ever seen Nat be afraid of was the Hulk.
Yeah, what's that about, eh? Like Canadian's hard. That whole thing.
I was about to say that's the most Canadian thing I've ever heard you say.
So Canadian. Like when I try really hard not to because Americans tend to point it out. But I was like, oh my God. Well, because you know Bruce Banner's my guy. Right? Those two, I just
okay, so I think the idea of it, similar to Scarlet Witch, had a guy be nice to her and she was suddenly in love. I think maybe what it was with Natasha was suddenly here's a man she can't control. I think that's the idea behind it. I'm not saying they did it well. I'm not saying it's good. I think that's what they were going for. Yeah.
At least it's plausible, but where were those good moments of her having a moment and him supporting her?
Well, you would need a much better writer for that.
Well, you'd need a writer who actually sort of cared about that character. And I think that was the problem with Black Widow from the beginning, is they had to put her in because she's a core member of the sort of default Avengers team. But nobody at Marvel at the time truly cared, like truly advocated for her as a character. Everything about, you see the difference between now people clearly care about Black Widow as a character. And so we get Yelena.
Yeah.
Who's spot on. Yeah. But it was very clear that Scarlett Johansson was cast for look.
Yeah.
And then they didn't even make her stick to that. No. Black Widow should not be running around with blonde hair. And people go, but 6 frames in the comics when she was in disguise. I don't care. Thor doesn't have black hair. Thor is blonde. Thor should stay blonde. It just, if Tom Hiddleston has to walk around with that god awful jet black mullet wig, Scarlett Johansson could be a redhead, right? And it is that thing about strength, and that's why I'm so pleased with She-Hulk, because they finally seem to be at least getting close, right, to a character that's actually a female character that we're watching learn to be strong.
Yeah.
And it's that show don't tell thing of, okay, we're supposed to accept Carol Danvers is strong. Okay, she's powerful, but strong. You know, she doesn't have very many connections. She keeps ghosting Banner. Piss me off. But where's the real strength? I mean, she got one punched by Thanos, and that was it.
Yeah.
The Wakandans, all the women in Wakanda managed to embody strength much more than she does.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Nat, we've gone through, but I mean, who else really is there? They really did sort of neglect those. And that's why I kind of like Zendaya's take on, well, Marie Jones, that when she does find out he's Spider-Man, she doesn't use it to have a moment. Right? She's just, yeah, I knew. I figured. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. She can handle it.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, Ned's adorable. Ned, talk about a guy who is brave.
Yeah.
Because dude has no powers, but he's right there, ride or die.
Well, I think he's going to be getting them.
I think so.
Saw him using the ring.
Yeah, well, yeah, I loved that. And now everybody has one of those fucking rings. And holy shit, put a tag on those. Like,
where is Sauron?
Well, have a find my phone feature on those things, man. Like, everybody's got them now.
Well, like I said, there's so many rings running around. Where's Sauron?
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like someone's giving out rings.
Yeah, Dormammu's gonna show up in the next movie and go, psych, all of y'all are now belong to us, right?
Well, you know, coming back to the subject of strength, I'm gonna bring it to a character that I know you love, and that's Rocky.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the thing about Rocky is his strength isn't that he can beat someone up.
Right.
His strength is, like I've said before, much like Captain America, he's a good man. Steve Rogers, Captain America. Yeah. He's a good man. And, you know, he's aware of his shortcomings. And, you know, the scene that always struck me, romantic that I am, is there's the scene where he's in the butcher shop with Polly. And Polly is like, what's with you and my sister? I don't get it. And Rocky says, we fill gaps.
Yeah.
And that always struck me because it's like we get the scene of them ice skating where he's like, I don't have much of a brain, so I use my body. And she's like, well, my mom told me I don't have much of a body, so I use my brain. And even in the second movie, he can't do it without her. You know, if she doesn't approve, then he's not gonna be fighting, which is actually always my biggest frustration with Adrian, where it's like, look, you married a warrior, you're gonna have to deal with him getting punched.
I kind of liked that she wasn't quite prepared though, right? Because I mean, that scene where he comes into the pet store, and it's clear he's going there just to talk to her.
See her.
Yeah. And I thought that, like, that was it's amazing that we both agree that, you know, High Romance in New American cinema is a movie about a boxer. Right? Because he has those moments where he's vulnerable, and the wonderful thing about the original Rocky is the way the characters stumbled over their words.
Yes.
And
that was very well done.
They do that with Huey on The Boys as well. Jack Quaid is the great D. Garth Ennisser. He takes a line and it's like, okay, I'm seeing that line on the page, but he transforms it into something a guy who is, you know, dancing as fast as he can would say. And Huey's very charming, but he's not polished in it. And that's he's a shining example of Huey and The Boys. He is at his worst when he's trying to be a superpower. He's at his best when he's being him and helping the people with superpowers by, you know, disabling alarms or doing something on the intercom as a distraction. And the kind of battle for his soul is whether he's gonna be himself or whether he's gonna be this thing he's not. And it's all a question of just how toxic is his relationship with Starlight this episode. And that, you know, that is where I see the Rocky thing, with him because, you know, Adrian, I think she fell in love with Rocky. She didn't fall in love with the Italian stallion. The boxing was something she sort of put up with because she cared about him.
Yeah.
And I thought that was good. I agree with you that fact that she never really accepted what he did for a living. But that's, you know, that's part of the reason that it's so hard for cops to keep marriages together too, right?
Yeah.
Like I mean, military wives tend to come from military families because they know the assignment, going back to the Peggy Carter thing again. But there's a lot of infidelity in those relationships too, because, you know, they get lonely.
Yeah.
And she's probably thinking, oh man, I'm the one that's going to have to take care of him when his eyes are swollen shut for 2 weeks after the fight.
True.
So as much as I agree with you that you're like, oh, come on, that's a weakness that worked because you get it.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
it is one of those things where it's part of her character. It's just, you know, I've talked about like the power behind the throne.
yeah.
And the queen who keeps everything together while the warlord. That's why I love the idea of Aphrodite and Ares. Is I'm like, infidelity and everything aside, but you know, love and war and all that. I have a headcanon that in the Wonder Woman movie, you know, it talks about Ares taking out the gods. And I've always imagined like maybe the first one he took out was Aphrodite, because one, getting rid of her would make it harder for love to spread between man. And also he would have had the easiest access to her.
See,
and I'm just imagining like Tyrion strangling Shay.
There's an example of a movie where they had it and then they lost it with Diana, right? That scene that Warner didn't want to put in the movie of her going across no man's land with the shield, with all the soldiers behind her. That was the essence of the character. And it's almost like Patty Jenkins just got tired and gave up with that second movie.
I don't know what happened there, man.
That's the only thing I can think of, because she clearly loves that character. She clearly wants to make it good.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's an example of, I get that the whole decision she made with the monkey paw and Steve Trevor, it was selfish and it was a mistake, but I cannot see someone who is the embodiment of truth deluding herself that way. That's not a mistake. That's actually out of character.
Yeah.
And, you know, it would be the same. They do that with Superman though, right? Like, that's the reason I've never, as well designed as the games are as games, I've never been able to get into Injustice.
You know, I suspect part of the reason why people like the idea of corrupted Superman is because Superman is an ideal. He's a shining beacon.
Yeah.
Of what humanity should strive to be.
And people resent it.
And people resent that. And so, especially now in our very cynical, grim, dark age, people want to see those beacons brought down. And this is why we continually get death of Superman, corruption of Superman. And have they said what they're doing with? There was a thing a few weeks ago where DC posted the bloody super shield.
Oh, that was just the anniversary of the death of Superman.
Okay, so it's not like they put out a comic or anything with that shield.
I hate that image, and I get why they did it, and I get what it is. I don't like it.
Same.
It's like there was this stupid crossover. This is when I started, quiet quitting DC. Batman dies, and it was this entire crossover of Batman not dying. It was all stories about Batman dying, but he didn't actually die. And I'm like, wow, this is worse than the crossover where there's a gorilla on the cover of every book. But I do think that's why I'm sort of focused on the idea of strength and shame and sort of being more open about being old school with a lot of these values is, the inner strength of Steve Rogers and the inner strength of Peggy Carter aren't that different. the same way Adrian at her core has that same sweetness and desire for connection that Rocky does.
Yeah.
And that's why they complement each other.
They fill
right?
gaps.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why Margot Kidder was such a good Lois Lane as well. And why I could have seen Stockard Channing as well, but I think Margot Kidder was the right pick because
Yeah.
Superman, he does the mild-mannered Clark Kent, but he's really Kal-El. He's alien and he's sort of awkward about it. And so he really liked her awkwardness, but
Yeah.
that moment of, the one, do you like pink? Right? That they chemistry tested the shit out of that scene, and good for them because it was essential.
Yeah.
Because it showed that, yeah, she's, she is a good reporter and she is go out there and do it. And she wants to save the world the same way he does, but she's got to do it in her own way.
Yeah.
And that has really been lost. And why I think we haven't had a good MJ is that guys who grew up reading Spider-Man don't understand why MJ worked.
Yeah.
And it was because basically it was based on Stan Lee's wife. Right? And MJ is, if you ever heard Stan Lee talk about his wife, she was his reason, right?
Yeah.
The reason he got up in the morning, everything like that. MJ is Peter's reason.
Yeah.
And if a writer doesn't understand that, it's not going to work. And I get why, since they started the Tom Holland series with them in high school, you can't tell that story.
and I think that is a problem we have nowadays, is you're not supposed to tell a woman's story and how it relates to a man, because that's considered unfeminist. And for a woman to exist to be like courtly love, but the whole idea of Lancelot doing it for Guinevere.
There's such an easy fix to that, though, right? Just tell the story from her point of view.
I'm sorry, do you remember what happened last time someone tried to do that?
Well, it didn't work, but that's because it wasn't, because they didn't get in her head, right?
Yeah.
They didn't actually understand.
I mean, I had made an Arthurian reference, so I immediately remembered Mists of Avalon, and we know how I feel about that book.
But I mean, that's my issue with Game of Thrones as well, as it's very clear George R. R. Martin is sort of afraid of women, or intimidated is a better word. Doesn't know how women think.
Okay, so do you know? Oh, this might be a spicy take. Have you seen the illustrations Frank Frazetta did for Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a picture of Éowyn against the Witch King. And she's in bikini armor.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently when the art was first released, everyone hated it. Like Tolkien fans were just, they hated it.
It is not literal canon.
No, but there is a part of me that's like, I look at that picture and I'm like, I don't think Tolkien fans in the 80s knew what to do with that, specifically with Éowyn as a sexy Frazetta girl.
You know what my take on that one is? Because, okay, by Frazetta standards, she's wearing an awful lot of clothes.
Agreed.
You just sort of see, she's like in an armor bathing suit.
Yes.
So her legs are bare, but her midriff isn't, and everything like that. To me, because of the pose and everything like that, if you know the story of Éowyn, it's almost a metaphor for, because she, it's the whole thing, I am no man, and then she kills him.
Yeah.
So that story, if you were to title that image, it would be Femininity Revealed, because it looks like he's gonna bash her skull in, but if you know the story, that's the moment before she goes, because she's still wearing her helm.
Yeah.
And in the story, she actually pulls her helm off and throws it down. And poor Mary, who's been riding with her all the way from like what Rowan is like, what the fuck? That wasn't a dude? You know, like that was the thing that didn't translate in the movie because they couldn't. But poor
Yeah.
Mary, man. Like, can you imagine? Like, oh, this is so awkward, you know? But that to me is and I know that is not a can, but knowing what I do about Frazetta,
Yeah.
it sort of his take on women, when I saw that was sort of what I took from that.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a bit of an old stereotype about the fantasy nerd who does not know what to do with women and does not know how to talk to them. And
Well,
I get a bit of that from Martin as well.
well, that was because the thing that always drove me crazy about the books, and I will not read if it ever comes out. I won't. I'm done. I did my time, because it always frustrated me that the only thing he seemed to know women wanted was boys. And so when anything else was going on, they were not a point of view character.
Does he have a sister?
Okay, George R.R. Martin's biggest claim to fame, according to him, is he was the first person to ever register for New York Comic Con. And so he comes by it honestly. Right?
Well, no, here's the thing. I just remembered in Gravity Falls, there's an episode where Mabel Pines is obsessed with this boy band. And Alex Hirsch has specifically said that it was based on his sister's obsession with boy bands.
Okay.
And I almost wonder if Martin had a sister, and so like he saw his teenage sister being like,
Yeah.
"Oh, boys, this," and so he's like, "Oh, that's what women are."
Yeah, that's what women are. Yeah, and that's when we talk about representation, and we talk about, you know, being in the room where it happens, you know, and the importance of women writers. There are some men who are really able to write write legitimate female characters. I mean, David Gator, Terry Pratchett, Eric Kripke's writers' rooms. Yeah, I mean, it is.
I have to mention Stepan Cedric because he's one of my favorite writers. Absolutely incredible female characters.
The stuff he did with Harley Quinn was dynamite.
Oh my god, it was so good. Really, I don't even like Harley Quinn that much. The
fact that he understood that was in her before the Joker got to her was so refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed that about his take on Harley. And I mean, that's the difference between write the character like a girl and write the character like a person.
Yeah.
And when we get into the issue of strength, like, you know, I love Yennefer as a character in The Witcher, and you know, it was playing the game and interacting with Yennefer and Triss as Geralt was a really interesting experience. Because of that thought of that scene where you have to decide whether to break their bond. I thought that was a really interesting, subtle choice in the game. And I chose to break it because Yen is all about not being controlled.
Yeah.
And if he cares about her, he will not hold her to that being stuck. Right? That just fundamentally does not understand who she is as a person. But then at the same time, they're not good for each other. And I do think that the reason the Witcher works so well as an RPG is Geralt would change based on who he chose. Because Geralt's a lot like Bucky Barnes in some ways, where he doesn't have much of a moral compass because, you know, he was tortured as a child.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. And that matters. And I think Henry Cavill going more into the games with that character, it brings the sense that bad shit happened to this dude more than the books did.
Yeah.
And so the idea of, okay, if you choose Triss, Geralt develops in a very, very different way than if he chooses Yennefer. And life with Yennefer is definitely more exciting. But if he's going to have any stability, Triss is the right call. And that, I mean, that's something that's evolved since the original stories, which I find really, really interesting in terms of adapted work. And one could argue that that's not accurate to the vision of the original books.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, let's face it, the most important woman in Geralt's life is Ciri.
Definitely.
And there's that thing again of redeeming the kind of asshole with a girl, a kid.
Yeah.
And I mean, that it's interesting. It keeps going back to the, I think that's a bit of wish fulfillment for men as well, right? Because more and more they still want to be seen as strong. They still want to be seen as tough, but that is a safe place to feel their feelings.
Is with children.
Yeah. And it's like you said, it works as a mommy porn thing too, but it's different than the problem we get into with any sort of, how do I put this? Because I don't want to say romance, because to me, a good romance is like in Rocky, where you get that moment where Adrian is not a bombshell.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something for both sides in that equation, as opposed to something like Twilight that is clearly from Bella's point of view and Edward is idealized and yet still creepy. Or you get it from, the male point of view with all that entails.
Yeah.
And good romances, well-written romances, you see both sides. And that's where I think the MCU struggles in terms of that internal strength, because they're so demographic driven, right? And I took a lot of shit for saying She-Hulk is not for the fanboy.
No.
And people kept trying to correct me, saying it's not primarily for the fanboy. It's not directed at, or what they kept trying to correct me. It's like, no, I meant what I said. It's not for fanboys. It's not. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the reason it's not for them, and I think that this is what gets misconstrued as being anti-male. That point of view, the character that represents that identity, like you said earlier, is completely absent from She-Hulk. It's all, unless you want to be Hulk, which I do. That was my point. That was my point in to She-Hulk, because I found Jen abrasive as shit in the first couple episodes.
Yeah.
And so, like, I see myself in Banner, I see myself in Wong much more than I see myself in Jen. And that's fine, because I know women like her. And so I support the characters, and she's just a more rounded out version of who she is in the comics. That's undeniable.
Yeah.
But because there's no character put in the story as representation, I think this is deliberate. There's no representative male character. Guys feel like it's against them. And I do feel like that's maybe it is a think. This is a structured argument. I do think that was deliberate creatively as something of an empathy exercise guaranteed to backfire. Because when it comes to accessing comic books from the feminine experience, we have to sort of do workarounds that way.
Yeah.
And I thought that really came into focus of, because I mean, we talked about it earlier, that I think about, would I have a beer with this guy or would I sit down to coffee with this guy? You're much more, noble barbarian boyfriend material. It just shows where we're coming from.
Yeah.
But, Bucky or Loki, that would be fucking shots. That would be a bar line of tequila. Just all right. For every shot you take, you have to talk about your feelings. No bullshit. And by about the sixth shot, we would be getting real, which is sort of what they did in She-Hulk as well. But guys have to engage with the She-Hulk show in this very strong character who, very much like the Marvel male superhero, starts off as sort of unlucky in love and not truly appreciated when, he's Peter as opposed to Spider-Man, all that stuff. But because she is challenging and because they deliberately make Jen not desirable. Like, they pretty much established that, right? No guy wants her. They all want She-Hulk.
Yeah.
I think that's where the reaction is because it is legitimately a superhero show that is not for men.
Well, for the men complaining about that, I think one thing they need to remember is over the last few years, especially since Endgame, we've had a lot of people, male fans especially, who have said, well, if they're catering more towards women, I don't care. I'm not invested anymore. Okay, well, then they're going to see which side the bread is buttered on. And they are going to appeal to the female fans who have been consistent and have been the most vocal.
Well, and let's face it, the Disney princess line is struggling right now. When was the last new
Frozen
princess? 2. Frozen 2.
Oh, yeah. Frozen, a new princess would be Moana.
Does she count as a princess?
Technically.
Okay, because Lilo didn't. So, yeah, like they are clearly, they're making the live action things. They're renewing those trademarks that way.
But even Moana is a deconstruction of the princess because she doesn't.
Tiana.
I don't see that as much with Tiana. I felt like they were trying to catch onto that. Okay, girls work now.
that was it. Tiana was follow your dreams and meet your goals, and the prince was get a damn job, fool.
I honestly, Naveen was part of why I hated that movie. Princess and the Frog did not work for me.
The music was surprisingly not good for the setting.
Yeah. It started with Enchanted, where it's like, oh, people like this deconstruction of the princess in the real world. And I'm like, as a one-time thing.
And even then, I don't think Enchanted stuck the landing.
Not really, no.
No, I didn't want the big confession of love moment. I wanted her in her curtain dress, not Gucci. They didn't, and maybe that's where they're going with Disenchanted, that she sold out. And if so, I'm on board.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, but that it's tough because I'll land on this point and then I'll give you the final word, because this is something I'm struggling with, because I don't, I have a lot of guy instincts, but I don't have to live with the pressures of being a guy. So I don't have that experience. And maybe I do with that thing I said of I'm not allowed that moment. So they share the resentment, because I hear that from guys a lot too. But it's like guys have grown up internalizing that they'll never be Thor, they'll never be Captain America, they'll never be these heroes, because like you said, they're ideals.
Mm-hmm.
And there seems to be this weird resentment, and yet at the same time this feeling of intense inadequacy. And that's why every bit part on She-Hulk was supposed to be an audience proxy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when the He-Man thing happened and guys were saying, I worked out and joined the military because I wanted to be He-Man and I looked up to He-Man. It's like, what part of he's not He-Man all the time? In his day life, he's Prince Adam. Didn't you internalize with that? And I say this as somebody that clearly heavily internalizes Steve Rogers and Bruce Banner. And, like, I'm like, I am going to be that inside. I can't be that outside, but I can follow the example. And it's like strength got so turned around that comic fans don't realize that every single one of these characters is physically strong. The thing that makes them special, the thing that makes them the unique hero is, Banner has to control his anger. Steve Rogers is that, leader, that he's Captain America. He has to be an inspiration. Thor struggles with worthiness and has to, if he doesn't live up to a certain minimum standard, he loses the ability to wield his super weapon. That's the things that makes these guys special, not the muscles, not the physical strength. Where do you land on this?
I mean, we've gotten to a point where we've come from these heroes who did represent something. Now we get these darker. I mean, on one hand, we get the grittier deconstructions. On the other hand, especially in women's media, we get these women who are the hot mess. Yeah. And we get to look at them, and instead of being given something to strive for and to strive to be, we get someone we either relate to, or we can go, hey, at least I'm not as much a mess as that chick.
Yeah.
Which I think we've lost something in that. And we've learned to be content in our, not even content, but to settle for how we are now and say, I'm just fine the way I am, which there's a point where, yes, that's important, learning to accept yourself for who you are, but that doesn't mean you stop striving to be better. Mm-hmm. And I think we've gotten lost in this, okay, just be who you are. And I think that's why men are insecure when they see someone like Thor, is because they don't understand that there's more to it than just the physicality, which is also a failure to understand nuance and storytelling. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, Thor, he's totally jacked. Okay, but what I like about Thor is, yes, I like the way he looks, but even more, I like that he's polite. In the first movie, the other movies, okay, he was really romantic in the second movie. That was a big sell.
The second movie was just messy structurally. Characterization, it wasn't bad.
The second movie was an 80s fantasy movie with a too large budget, basically.
Well, that's what happens when you get a TV director to direct a feature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've become so focused on accepting ourselves. We don't understand that the whole point of heroes is not necessarily someone to relate to, but it's someone to aspire to be.
Yeah. And as long as you get close, you're better off.
Yeah.
You don't have to 100% it.
Yeah.
You know what I like about Thor? It's funny you were talking about that. How happy he is when he's fighting. He's a happy warrior. That moment where the Hulk comes out, it's like facing the Hulk is not gonna be fun. But Thor's super excited because it's his buddy, right?
Yeah.
And those are the moments that I'm like, because a guy, I am Darcy, I am not Jane. I will never attract a guy like Thor, ever. I have too much dude energy, right? And so I want to be the guy that Thor sees and goes, I just referred to myself as a guy, but he sees me and goes, yes, we work together. Right?
I mean, look, I've got some of the most feminine energy I've ever had. And
Well,
I
that's the
still
thing.
can't
You
get a
got a
man like Thor.
chance. Like, like I'm realistic here. Like it's just not there'd be nothing there. Because I see Darcy and Thor and go, oh, shit, that's me.
Yeah.
Like, that's so me. Bless Kat Dennings. And I think that's why because I always ship her with Jimmy Woo.
I can see that. Yeah.
Like, could you imagine a sitcom with, I know I've talked about this before, but a sitcom like Friends marveled.
I might actually watch that.
You take all those supporting characters and have them have to live in a lab to do this experiment. So it's like the Friends apartment, and there's like the girls' dorm and the boys' dorm sort of thing. But then they all realize they don't do that, so they get their own roommates. But they have to like solve this science thing or something like that. But they all have to sort of live together, and it's basically Friends. I'd watch the shit out of that. I don't care.
I'd watch that, and I hate Friends.
Yeah, but it's the format of this group of people who are all big personalities, but like each other.
That would be nice.
Yeah. And they have the characters now. They have the characters now. What's his name? From Ms. Marvel has to go off to college, and he needs to rent a room. And so Darcy's renting a room or something like that. I don't know. Like, find a way to shove these characters together, because it's like
an internship.
It's like what they're doing with Wong, right? They know people like him, and they want to see those slice of life things, because the nice thing about being a sidekick in these stories is you get to have a life. There's a reason that Watson went off and got married and Sherlock didn't. So, all right, this was a long one. It'll probably be 2 parts, but
I was thinking that.
Thank you so much. Well, we had those technical difficulties, so there was sort of that stop and start in a few places. But Song can be found at Song W. Erickson. Now we know the origin of that name. On Twitter and YouTube and various and sundry places. You got anything you wanna plug?
Not really.
All right, so we're just gonna sign off. Our relationships to Thor are why we are tomboy and girly girl. And this has been 2 Women Talking.